Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with part 19, some elementary speculations from some mystical adventures by G.R.S. Mead. Chapter 19, some elementary speculations. For the purpose of this adventure, I would be so bold as to presume to convert the word speculation to its original meaning of intelligent interpretation or observation or inspection. It was once a word of dignity and connoted, we are told, the pursuit of truth by means of thinking, especially mathematical reasoning and logical analogies, meditation, deep and thorough consideration of a theoretical question. In brief, it was a synonym of the Greek theory, and its proper use pertains to the theoretic or contemplative life. It is a genuine mystical exercise and perhaps the basis of a scientific practice. I propose then to speculate in order to bring into clearer definition some obscure notions which many who are interested in psychic subjects accept without further inquiry. It is very confusing to use the same term to connote things that differ from each other fundamentally. One of such terms of prolific confusion is the word plane. It is indiscriminately used for varying grades of matter and modes of consciousness which come under one fundamental law, and also for others that differ fundamentally and are not bound by the law of manifestation. If we would seek to suggest to ourselves the fundamental mode of manifestation, it must, I think, be sought for under the general notion of that blessed word vibration, of which so much is said and so little understood. The root meaning of the term is connected with the idea of movement to and fro. In physics, it is said to denote an oscillating, reciprocating, or any kind of stationary motion made by a body as a pendulum, musical chord, electric plate, or mass of air when forced from the position, figure, or volume of equilibrium under the influence of forces of resistance. The simplest example of vibration is that of a string stretched between two fixed points, set in motion by an applied force. And this may serve as a very suggestive indication of the law that obtains on the planes of manifestation. That is how everything works below the unitary state or state of wholeness. In the realms of duality or of the special or partial universe, it may be figured by 2 points, one at each end of an imaginary straight line. As for the modes of sight conditioned by this law, they may be all both normal and extra-normal, appropriately called by some general term. There can doubtless be varying degrees of such sight. Indeed, there seems no reason why they should not be varied indefinitely. But so long as the theorist keeps his laws fundamentally the same for all such varying degrees of sight, they should be more appropriately called by some generic term than by such designations as etheric, psychic, mental, and so forth. For they are all founded on vibration and the fundamental essence which may appropriately be called ether. The first suggestion for one who desires to become a speculator of things as they are is that he should endeavor to obtain a clear insight into the nature of the fundamental difference between those modes of sight that are conditioned by a law founded on principles of vibration or motion between two stationary points, and those modes that are fundamentally other than these. The fundamental law of this otherness must, in the nature of things, be quite different from that of the normal physical modes. It is the nature of this otherness of consciousness that should be speculated upon by those who desire to obtain just notions of something other than physical, both dense and subtle. For many seem to take etheric to mean just simply a thinner physical, and so for the rest. To get to this otherness, the speculator, it would seem, will have to turn himself entirely inside out, so to speak. For the state he strives to realize will be conditioned by laws fundamentally opposed to all known laws on the physical plane. We might thus speculate that perchance it is founded on a law that may be symbolized by a point in the middle of a sphere. It would be much easier for men to pass from one phase or plane of the first world of sight or consciousness than to attain to this second world. For in the former, all are modes of the same principle by which we see on the physical. But the latter world would be utterly different, because founded on a different law. The principal planes or main phases of the former might be said to be like earth, stones, and houses, while the latter would be like water. But however hard a man may try to construct upon his normal experience, the state of otherness should refuse to obey the laws of normal objective observation. It is better to think of abstract nouns. And so by adding together all the ideas one can get on the formal human plane, Endeavor to deduce flow, life, meaning. It is no good trying to construct. If you find yourself constructing, you may be reasonably sure you are far from the state of otherness. This otherness is rather a plane of life. It does not construct. And by construct is meant a verb that suggests form or death, differentiation, difference, separated ideas. By life, on the contrary, is meant a unifying principle. In the one mode, our universe is outside us, our energies or currents flow xwards to external objects. In the other, they are within, our whole universe is inside, within the consciousness. The former state may be symbolized by an ellipse or egg, the latter by a circle or sphere. To get from one state to the other, the line of consciousness between the two foci should be made to disappear. The 2 points should draw together until they blend into one. The change that thus occurs might then be thought of under the imagery of what we may call swirls, or self-centered monads, each perpetually turning itself inside out, so to say, expanding into a sphere and contracting into a point, in such a mode that we cannot possibly find two foci in the system. This is in one sense the mystic atom, and atoms, it is said, are the things in the world of men that contact the world of the gods. And by atom is here meant the reduction of a thing to such minuteness that it will not go any smaller however much we apply the same process. It then becomes the point where things begin to grow great again, that is, upon the God's side of life. It is, however, a mistake to imagine that what are generally called higher planes cannot in any way be understood by normal people who are not psychic. For there is always something on the physical to correspond with things on such higher planes. And if a man has got the mind to understand physical things, he can understand, though he cannot experience, extra-physical things. And if things are in exactly the same ratio, they are practically the same. To get unstuck from the normal, some such kindergarten amusement might be suggested as the following. Draw a beetle from a man's point of view and then draw a man from a beetle's point of view. And don't forget that a beetle's mind is most probably instinctual and not formal. Then ask yourself the question, what is the difference between a man and a beetle? Does either of the drawings attempted really represent a man or a beetle? Supposing your eyes were not in your head but in your toes, what would the room look like? Draw it. Supposing your toenails were all eyes, what would the world look like? The world of the room. There would not be any carpet in the first place, because that would be at the back of your head. It would be mostly ceiling, very little else. After making a series of such experiments and so getting to another point of view, we might proceed with an unprejudiced mind and with the added freedom of a new contact with things to ask ourselves the pertinent question, why on earth do we put our furniture at the bottom of the room? The reason for which will be clearer a little later on. Now you cannot see what is next you see what is opposite you. That is because seeing may be compared with vibration between 2 points. Why cannot we see our own faces? Are we quite sure this is impossible? We have our 2 points and no dense material in between, so we ought then to be able to see our own faces. But is there such a possibility as physical sight by means of curved lines? If there be, it is quite legitimate to employ the term physical for such sight, and far less confusing than to use the word astral, as is sometimes done. For that only makes people get vague and without ideas, as it suggests something superphysical. Let us say for the moment that normal physical sight is seeing by means of 2 points, one active and the other passive, between which it is possible to draw a straight line. Then this other physical sight, the so-called psychic, may be represented by 2 points between which you cannot draw a straight line, but can draw a curved line. Similarly, so-called mental sight is imagining yourself somewhere where your body is not, and thus being able to see the object with physical sight. This is a kindergarten suggestion of how these sights work, and not a showing of the results. Supposing you look at a cube edgeways instead of directly at one face of it, the object entirely changes. It is a different shape. Light and shade change and proportion changes. Here shape may be called physical, light and shade so-called astral, and proportion so-called mental. And here we ask another test question. What is perspective fundamentally? This is an admirable subject of speculation. Those capable of thinking out perspective scientifically should be able to help us to understand, or at any rate to think profitably about the way, for instance, Egyptians and Chinese drew and draw. Is it possibly because they saw and see perspective from a different point of view and not solely a question of ignorance, as is generally supposed? May not something happen in our minds which alters the mental view, that is, the proportions of objects? May not perspective be mental, not actual? Must not all perspective be rubbed out before we can get outside form? To get outside form, however, in such speculation does not mean giving up form and becoming blank. It would seem rather to mean freedom from any special point of view, from any convention of perspective. But to proceed to speculate further, may there not be regions of the universe other than the physical state known to us? Regions where, for instance, spheres may be stationary and will not roll, and where cubes, the most stable forms of our physical, roll directly, the law which holds things together in that space is displaced. To obtain some notion of such a topsy-turvy state of affairs, we may indulge in the kindergarten exercise of trying to imagine, on the physical plane, what difference it would make if such a state of affairs obtained. Chairs, for instance, would not have legs, for if they had, they would roll directly they were touched. A further exercise to test the ingenuity, adaptability, and plasticity of the mind would be to try to think about surface in this connection. Flat surfaces and curved surfaces and their effect on spheres and cubes. If on a flat surface, a plane, resistance and pressure are less for, let us say, balls than for what we may call flats, what sort of surface then will it be where the reverse is the case? What is the nature of curved space? And here one might take surface in a deeper meaning. It need not be necessarily confined to the geometrical concept of superficies, but extended to mean something more resembling the notion suggested by the vaguely used term plane to denote states of matter other than the normal physical. The term plane in this sense, however, might perhaps be better defined as field of action. In topsy-turvy land, then, houses would have to be built like balls, and indeed that is precisely the idea of matter which has been suggested by some mathematical speculators, the round-shot theory. The shape of the space between interstitial space must also be speculated upon. Trains and carriages, that is to say things on wheels in our physical world, would there have to be cube-shaped, or would run on cubes or flats of some kind? Houses and beds would have to be spherical so that they might not run away in the night. Water would be the earth of this topsy-turvy plane. All water there would be fixed. Earth would be mobile. Things of like nature cannot interpenetrate. So-called astral beings are said to be unable to pass through water, though they can pass through brick walls quite easily. Water is the material of their own bodies, so resists them or is held together by the same power as that by which they are held together. Imagine, therefore, all water fixed, rigid, all earth like sand, capable or possible of readjustment. Let us imagine all the objects in our world made of sand, so that it were possible for us to force our way through them if we wanted to. But when we had passed through them, they would reassume their normal shape, just as water does on the normal physical plane. There are, it is said, beings who are as much held back by water as men by earth, because they are of water, water-born, just as physical man is of earth, earth-born. In our physical world, when things are flat, balls do not move. It is when the surface is tilted or diagonal or curved that the force which binds things together is what we call displaced, and things begin to move. On the water plane, it is just the reverse. Curves are the rule. It is the normal angle at which the force of the plane holds things in equilibrium. If one would move on the water plane, he has to know how to make curves flats. Then he begins to move at once without using any force, just as in the physical world a ball rolls downhill because it cannot help it. It is then a good speculation to work out for oneself a world on such a plane and put in tables and chairs, etc., all of the proper shape. Not because our water creatures really use tables and chairs and beds and blankets and sheets, but because it is helpful for the young adventurer to get some objective idea into his mind of how similar forces would operate if they did exist on our plane. And then when he has done that, it will be more easy to deduce the rules and laws and principles and so prepare himself mentally for sensible experience of the subjective reality of regions other than the normal physical. Nor need the self-complacent be contemptuous of this childlike exercise, no matter how nonsensically it may appear to work out at the beginning, for we must begin with the elements and elementals too in this life school. It is a legitimate training of the imagination and a good game to play at, guesses at what to expect. Let us cast away our staid notions of physics and mathematics and metaphysics and other wise conceits for the time, and turn our water into ice and our earth into sand. Thus our water, our emotional nature, becomes fixed, unflutterable. Our earth, our physical, becomes sand, decomposed without losing its form held together in such a way that it is no obstruction. That means that mind has transformed itself from the objective to the subjective, but remains the same. Physical freaks may be sometimes significant of what is happening normally somewhere in the subjective. They are, of course, less abnormal than a physical world with spheres and cubes reversed, which we have taken on the physical as an indication of what perchance may be the nature of the so-called astral. And exercising the physical brain to imagine such a state of affairs is a healthy way whereby a just idea of this otherness may be deduced. It is unwise to bind the astral world by our laws. It is saner to imagine the physical world bound by its laws and freed by its laws. Then it may be that some helpful ideas will come. The actual realization, I believe, begins when the subtle body is, so to speak, capable of decomposing into hundreds of thousands. This is the beginning, the elemental side of the new birth, when the inner body begins to obey the laws of that region. The mind loses its grasp of physical matter as usually experienced. The body, for greater consciousness, becomes as sand, countless. The emotions are fixed or stable, and all is in train for the birth of a new force with which to move and think. The neophyte, or new-grown one, is on the countless side of things, yet form remains. But astral and physical go topsy-turvy, and form becomes transparent, and when shattered, immediately recomposes itself. It becomes self-adjustable. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.